Hello and welcome to Gabbett Media. I'm Grant Abbott, and in today's session we're going to be taking your brilliant models and putting them onto Sketchfab. This particular model that I'll be putting onto Sketchfab is from the course Fantasy Castle on the Floating Island. You can see those playlists in the description. Do check out the other playlists on my channel for beginner courses, and if you want a more detailed course, there's my character course available to purchase now, and again, all the links in the description. This video is sponsored by Sketchfab, which is a great place to buy and sell and view 3D models online. I've used it for a few years now to sell models, and what's really fantastic is that you can view the faces and topology of the model before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting. You can create an excellent portfolio on there, so you can show off your work to its fullest. Links in the description. Okay, so here's my model, and I'll just go through a few things which you need to do before you export. So if I click on different objects, like the dragon for example, and I'll just control spacebar so you can see all the nodes. This is my node setup for the textures, but you can see it's not plugged in because I baked all that out onto one single texture. If you need to know more about baking, it's fairly straightforward. Just check out the link in the description or search for my baking playlist on my channel. You'll need to do that for any texture that has some sort of node setup plugged into it. So even this roughness, I should really bake this out, but I'm probably not going to use it, because it only had a tiny bit of influence anyway. So you should just have a single texture like this plugged into your principal BSDF, because that's what you'll need to set up in Sketchfab. I'll press Ctrl Spacebar again to get back to my UV editing workspace. And if you look at the shader editor here, you can see that all my textures have a single texture going in to the principled BSDF. Now I did just click on the castle, and that's got a slight hue and saturation. It's minor, so I'm not going to bake that out. I'm not too worried about it. So once again, just make sure that all your objects have a single texture going in or no texture, because that's easy to set up in Sketchfab. I'm not going to talk about animations. I'll leave that for another time. But if you have got any characters that have a pose, like my dragon had a pose initially, I just applied my armature. That way it won't get confusing in Sketchfab. It can handle that, but it's just simpler to apply it. Okay, so at this point, you should be ready to select all your objects and export them as an FBX. Now it's worth saying before I do that there are Sketchfab export add-ons, but I actually prefer doing it this way. I just find it a little bit easier and a tiny bit less glitchy. So I'll go File, Export. You can do an FBX or an OBJ. I tend to stick with FBX. With the easier and a tiny bit less glitchy. So I'll go File, Export. You can do an FBX or an OBJ. I tend to stick with FBX. With the FBX, just make sure that you have selected objects ticked. Then press Export. Make sure that you have selected objects ticked. Then press Export. Now if that takes a long time, then you might have extra objects selected that you didn't want. Okay, so let's get across to Sketchfab. Press Export. Now if that takes a long time, then you might have extra objects object selected that you didn't want. Okay, so let's get across to Sketchfab. You'll want to click on the upload option at the top here, and you can drag and drop your model into this space. So here's my file, I can drag and drop that in. And press continue. Whilst it's uploading, put in a title, give it a good description. Make sure you choose a category as well. Sometimes a little bit tricky, but I think this is probably character and creatures perhaps. It might possibly come under architecture a bit, so I'll put that on there as well. And some tags. So let's save that, and let's go to Edit 3D Settings. And now we're able to edit all the materials and add a few effects for our model. So if I go to Materials, the first thing that comes up is the castle. And for the castle, I've got a texture. So if I press the down arrow next to the base color and go to Texture, underneath that there's Import Textures. I can then select all my textures and press Open, and now I can choose the texture I need, which is underneath that there's Import Textures. I can then select all my textures and press Open, and now just base color and go.
Okay, I didn't know this. Jeez Louise. Where is that thing? Base color, texture, import textures. These are some of my favorite cars. Anyways, let's talk about these ones.
Go to Texture. Underneath that there's Import Textures. I can then select all my textures and press Open, and now I can choose the texture I need, which is Castle Base Color. And that appears on my object. And you've got the roughness and glossiness here, so it's got no glossiness at all, so it's all the way down to 0, which is how I had it in Blender.